Good morning, Braywell Court School. What are you going to do today? Learn, enjoy, succeed. Well, if I'd have known you were coming up into the office today, I would have tidied up for you. Right, so we are recording assembly for Thursday, the 7th of May, and this is the last assembly in our run of assemblies all about VE Day. And remember, the 75th anniversary of VE Day is tomorrow, Friday, the 8th of May. So we've done lots of learning about it already with me and Mrs. Robertson, but today, to finish off, we have got a very special guest joining us. So the reason that we're up in the office today is that in a minute I'm going to have a Zoom call, you can see it waiting to start here, with great grandma Hilda, and as soon as she joins the call then I'll cut over to that on the video so that you can watch. Now, great grandma Hilda, I've always wanted to interview her for you to see, and I could never really quite work out how we could do it while we were at school, but actually it's much easier to do it now because I can video it and show it to you that way. So she will tell you when she joins us how old she is, but she is old enough that she lived through World War II. So how wonderful. We are going to do some living history today, and she is going to tell us all about what it was like living during World War II. So that would be fantastic. Okay, I'll see you when she joins us in a second.
Yes, it's exciting, isn't it?
It's really exciting. Okay, hello. So maybe you would like to start by, I'll introduce you, shall I? So this is great grandma Hilda Donnelly. So Hilda is my grandma by marriage, and we've known each other for a long time now, haven't we? And
Yes, we have.
would you mind telling everybody how old you are? I know we wouldn't normally ask a lady, but would you mind telling everyone how old you are?
Well, I'll be 92 in July.
That's
And
pretty
this is the
old.
first time we've done this sort of thing.
Right, we FaceTime a lot, don't we? And now you've got the hang of Zoom and stuff as well. So it's very clever indeed.
Yeah.
And so this week for our assemblies, we're going to learn all about VE Day, which is being celebrated on Friday. And so this will go out on Thursday, which is just the day before. And the thing is that the children won't really know much about what VE Day is or why it was such an important celebration. So we've done a couple of videos explaining to them that it's to do with the World War II finishing. But one of the amazing things I think about learning about history that's not from that long ago, 75 years, is that there are still a few people left who remember it firsthand. So what an amazing way to learn about it, to be able to talk about it. So I wonder if you would be able to tell us what you remember about the war and what happened to you and how old you were.
Yes, I can do that, yes. I was 11 in 1939, in July 1939, and I lived at home with my mum and dad and my little sister Norma, who was 5. And we were very poor as a family, but we didn't know that. My sister and I didn't know that because everybody else was equally as poor. But we had a happy time. We had lots of cousins and aunts and uncles, and 2 grandmas at the time and a granddad. And my grandma, who was on her own, used to take me a lot to the cinema, where we saw all kinds of films that I still remember. And it used to cost 6pence, which I think is about 2.5 pence these days. So that's not bad, is it? But there's a lot of money there. So everything was fine. We went to school. We went to a school called Croft Terrace in Jarrow, where we lived. And suddenly things got a bit worrying because everybody, all the adults, were talking about war. And we used to listen to what we called the wireless then, which was now the radio, and saw newspapers, but we didn't have television or anything like that. So we just had to listen to what the adults were talking about and say, well, we should do this and we should do that. Of course, I knew all about how to win the war. And then came the day when, our Prime Minister flew to Germany to speak to Mr. Hitler, who was the enemy, really, to ask him if he would stop doing all the horrible things he was doing. And then we saw a film. We saw at the cinema. We used to see a newsreel, which was all about the news about the war and what was happening in Europe. And Mr. Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, came back saying he'd failed in what he was going to do. So therefore, we would prepare for war. And then on the Sunday morning, on the radio, came the announcement, we are at war. And I was with my mum listening to this, and she cried. My dad, who had been a soldier when he was a young man, had already had to go. And he was living quite close to us, so he could come home, but he was in uniform. So it was very worrying. But then the government decided that children who were living in areas where there could be a problem with bombing would have to move and go and live somewhere else in the country. And we were called evacuees. Mum didn't want us to go anywhere, but Dad thought it would be much safer. So the day we didn't have much time to prepare, so Mum got 2 bags made for us where we could take a change of clothing, I suppose toiletries, toothbrush, etc. And we had to carry our gas mask. Do the children know about gas masks?
No, I don't think they will. I'm going to find a picture to show them, I think, actually, what they look like, because they're quite scary, weren't they, really?
Well, they were in a box, in a little box, and they were rubber, and you put them over your ears, like the masks, more or less, but it had a big round thing on where the bad air would go in and be, fixed. But we all had to have that with us at all times. You couldn't go anywhere without a gas mask.
Did you wear it very often?
No, we didn't. No. So
just carried it everywhere.
Yes, you had to. It was we got quite posh bags, and we had to put them in there. But they weren't plastic, because plastic wasn't around then. But they were rather nice, shiny sort of whatever it was in those days. So you had a shoulder strap. So the day came when we had to meet at our school. And we walked from the school to the local station. My mother couldn't go because she was too upset. So Dad came with us, and he was in his uniform, and he was a very tall man. And I noticed, and I've told you this, Gemma, how upsetting it is for me now. Dad was crying. And I thought, why is he crying? To me, it was an adventure. So we were put on a train, and my sister and I, and most of the other kids, opened their packed lunches. And I remember having egg and tomato sandwiches, which was my favourite and still is. And we got on a train that took us ages and ages. We arrived at a station.
Did you know where you were going? Did you know anything about it?
We had teachers with us.
Okay.
But no parents were allowed to go. So we got on a bus and travelled through little villages, and then arrived at a school, and that was called Fatfield Junior School. So we were taken in there and put in classrooms, and we had to sit at desks. So Norma and I sat together, and there were a lot of people moving around. Our teachers were moving around, but there was one couple, an older man, with a young woman who was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. She was absolutely stunning. So all these people kept moving around. They kept taking children away, and eventually all the children left, and Norma and I was left sitting there on our own.
Oh no!
And very big boats as well. We didn't look tatty. We looked very. So then the man who had been moving around and the lovely lady came, and they had chosen us. They reserved us from the very beginning. And he was the head teacher. So the young woman was his daughter, and we were taken away. We got in a car. I'd never been in a car before, so I thought I was Princess Elizabeth, and I was waving to the crowds. Off we went, and we arrived at a village. It was called Pictree Village, but the area that we lived in was called Rickleton, High Rickleton. So in the house was the man's older daughter and his younger daughter, who was a beautiful girl, and that was where we were indefinitely. We didn't know how long. So we were okay. It was better than we'd left, that's for sure. There was a garden, and it was in the country, really. There was a big castle quite close to us called Lambton Castle. Lots of grounds there. And then there was a farm. The farmer used to let us play there. He had two sons. One was older than the majority of us, but his youngest son played with us. There were some other people who'd been evacuated privately, like the farmer's niece and nieces.
Right.
But the farmer himself had taken two of the girls that had gone on the train with us. So, and we learned that the vicar in the village had taken 4 boys, and they were the worst kids in the town. Everybody knew. They took the doors off the vicarage. They did all kinds. And eventually, the girls who were at the farm, they left. They couldn't hack it. They went home. Lots of children actually did go home, but we stuck it, and I just thought I had to do it. You know, I just was doing what I was told. I remember writing and telling Mum I'd like to go home, but she ignored it. And then,
That must have been hard for her.
It must have been hard. But eventually we settled in, and to be honest, was probably an idyllic childhood without the love. There was no love.
Yeah.
So, of course, everybody had to obey the rules. We had to have identity cards. Everybody had to carry an identity card, which had a number on. And I remember mine, it was the FHDM 794. So we did that all the time. We had to do that. Then the beautiful lady left to go somewhere secret. We thought she was going to London. Anyway, it was long after the war that we discovered where she had been. She'd been in Bletchley Park. So she was bound by the Official Secrets Act.
Wow, way.
So she was there.
Gosh.
Yes, that was quite interesting.
Yeah. So how long did you end up being evacuated for?
I was there just over 3 years.
It's a long time,
but the war
isn't
hadn't
it?
finished.
Right.
Yes, I had to leave school, of course. You know, I had to go to a different school.
Yeah.
So I chose to go to what was called a commercial school, and that was so. I chose to go to what was called a commercial school, and that was back in Jarrow. So Mum and I were there. Norma stayed right until the end of the war, which must have been terrible.
And she was much younger, really, wasn't she, as well?
He was 5, so she was there until she was nearly 11.
And on her own then?
Yes, it was awful for her. And, you know, they were all right, the people, but there was no warmth. You know, we had to do what we were told. And for me, the worst thing was we couldn't buy sweets. You know, we couldn't buy chocolate. They did produce something called ration chocolate, which I would eat, you know, because it was chocolate, but it was horrible. Mm-hmm. But Dad used to save his chocolate ration that every soldier got, and he would save it in between leaves. And of course, he was always in Europe, so he could get home on leave. Okay. And he would bring masses of chocolate. And they used to put it up on the highest shelf in the house so that Norma and I couldn't get to it. And the worst thing about that was they would allow us 2 squares of chocolate.
Ah, it's like Charlie and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, isn't it? That's all he had.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was really cruel. And no wonder I'm a chocoholic now.
Yeah, that's probably why.
So, but one day they had a big pantry, and we were encouraged to help, do things. And every time I went in to get something, I could see a bar of chocolate that had slipped under a cooling tray that you use when you've been baking. And no one ever mentioned that. It wasn't my chocolate. But one day I went into the pantry, grabbed the chocolate and ran out, went to the field. And I think the chocolate went in like a mincer, and then I got a nosebleed.
With Norma, did you eat it all yourself?
Oh, no, I was all by myself. I wouldn't get involved in a crime, would I? So we did that. But when the weather was good, the farmer was great. He used to take us all over the place. He had a big car, pile all the kids in, which of course he's not allowed to do now. But he used to take us to look at fields where his sheep were. It could be miles away from the farm. And then we used to play in the barns and things. And then in the summer, that was great because that was hay time. And I used to drive the horse and cart. And he was great. He let us play on the haystacks, and it was good. We enjoyed it. So then, of course, I had to leave, and I came home, went to school. Then I realized about the bombing, because the River Tyne was just there, and there were shipyards, loads of different countries' ships coming in for repair, whatever. There was loads of stuff coming in. And the bombing, it was always at night. And I never wanted to get out of bed. I wanted to stay in there. Mum said, come on, get up. We had to go into the air raid shelter. And regardless of how long the raid lasted, we had to go either to school the next day, unless the school was, bombed. But we had to go. And then I eventually got a job. I had to go and work in an office. And so we just carried on. It was, nowadays there are things saying, stay safe, stay at home.
Yeah.
We have loads of posters saying, and stay at home saves lives, don't they? Stay at home. We had posters saying, careless talk costs lives.
Yeah.
So you couldn't tell people your plans, you couldn't say very much. But anyway, I enjoyed what I was doing. And the time went by. There were loads of different nationalities coming in to the port where my office was. Americans, Canadians, French, lots of French sailors, and British sailors, and loads of men going to the shipyards to work. So it was a very, very popular place. And then I grew up, and then we could see from the news on the cinema that the war was coming to an end. We were doing well in Europe, and then Winston Churchill decided that the Germans surrendered, really, and so that was the end of war in Europe. So he said we could have a little time to celebrate. So people who had rations and nothing for such a long time, they suddenly found food, and somebody had a piano in the street. People brought tables out, and I had a day off work. But a couple of days previously, I'd met a young man who I went to school with, my very first school. And he was the same age as me, but he was already an officer in the army. But I think at school, especially boarding schools, they had what you called an OTC, an officer training corps.
Right.
So he would probably be in that at school, and then he was in the army. So we made an arrangement to go to a dance, which was the thing that you did in those days. We had a great time, and then he took me home, and that was it. But we had a great day. It was a happy day. And then we had to carry on because the war went on I think at least 3 months longer than that.
So it wasn't really quite the end, was it?
It wasn't, no, because the end was in, we're still fighting in Burma. And in fact, on the news today, they showed pictures of the fighting in Burma, because that's where Captain Tom, that's where he was. Yes, yes. And that was awful. That was terrible there to go there.
So he'd have been in his 20s, wouldn't he? Because he's sort of, well, he's 8 years older than you, isn't he? So, yeah. So was it scary? Do you remember being scared with the bombs dropping and all the fighting happening?
Not really. Not really. I wasn't scared with the bombing. I used to worry about Dad, because I knew that, he was actually fighting. But no, I wasn't really.
Did you hear from him very often?
Oh, yes, he used to write a lot. And we used to write back to him. And when he came on leave, he used to come and visit us. So, we knew that, I knew most of the time that he was okay. Yeah.
Do you know what he was actually doing, or what experiences he had?
Yes, he was in the Royal Engineers, and they were building bridges. They were called Bailey bridges, and they were to let tanks cross rivers, or infantry, but they did that. He never really talked very much about it, but he would tell us funny things, like the engineers would go on the bridge when it was finished, and they would start jumping on it, which made the bridge wobble, and so the infantry would come on and fall in the river. Which I think that's probably how we won the war. I remember him telling us that he'd been in fighting, and then there was a lull, and he dived under a tank, and he dived into the body of a dead cow, which was a good experience.
So he was actually involved in the fighting as well as the engineering side of it then as well.
Yes, and of course he had to escape through Dunkirk. He was one of the hundreds that came back through Dunkirk, and that was it was awful, the whole thing. And I saw him on a newsreel after the war, after he had died. He came home safely. He didn't get wounded or anything in the war. But there was a film on a special program called Churchill's Memoirs. And I spotted Dad being fished out of the sea and put into a boat. And he had a cigarette straight into his mouth and turned around and picked somebody else up. And that's what I was looking for when we went to the Imperial War Museum, when we spotted him again.
We did. He's everywhere.
He's a film star.
That was really good though, wasn't it? Because we sat and watched the film go round, because you thought it might be the one with him on it. And then it was. We saw him, didn't we?
Will wouldn't leave. Do you remember? Will wouldn't leave because he and I had got isolated from the rest of the group.
Yeah.
And as I was walking towards Will, because I'd been searching for this when I saw a newsreel of the war coming on, I turned around and said, "Gosh, that's my dad." And when I got to Will, I said, "I think I just saw my dad." And he wanted to go back. And I said, "Oh, no, we've got to go and meet up with the others." And he just didn't want to leave until he'd seen it. Yes.
And you stayed and watched the whole thing round again, didn't you?
Yeah,
and then we all watched until he came on.
Yeah.
That was amazing, though, to see him.
Yes. And Ben videoed it, didn't he? So I keep watching it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's nice to have that. And you've still got his uniform, haven't you?
I have, yes. I should have had it with me and I could have shown you what it was.
Well, next time, when this is all over and we come up to see you, maybe I'll borrow it and then I'll bring it down to show the children, because that's really cool, isn't it?
It's Christopher, grandson, Christopher. He wore it once when we had a party where we lived in Bracknell. We had a street party for a celebration of VE. So he was persuaded to wear Dad's uniform and carry his kit bag and come into the party as if he had just come on leave.
Ah, that's nice.
Yes.
Yeah, because I was looking at some photos for an assembly earlier in the week of the VE Day celebrations, but there's no men in the photos of the parties because none of them were there, were they? They were all off fighting
They
still.
didn't get home straight away. No.
Yeah.
So yes, so it was okay if you're too young to really understand what was going on, but for adults it must have been awful.
What do you think the hardest bits were about it?
Well, probably for me, the chocolate ration.
Well, yeah, but the food was rationed generally, wasn't it? Because it was so hard to get hold of things. So did you have less rationing when you were evacuated? Because they have chickens on the farm with eggs.
They had chickens, we had eggs. And people would barter things, and if you had 6 eggs, swap it for somebody's pig or, a bit of bacon or something. Yes, that was... I never felt hungry. But at first, I suppose I did. But Elsie, the housekeeper, the older daughter, was a very good cook. But she wouldn't let us eat loads. We could never get seconds, and some of the food was excellent. And I wanted more. She wouldn't let us have seconds. She would give it to the dog. And I reached the where I would have eaten the dog. I blooming dog. So, yeah. But what we did, we listened to the radio in the evening. That radio didn't go on except for news bulletins. And evenings we sit around listening to things. But we had a lot of wool. The WRVS used to provide wool, various colours like khaki or RAF blue. And we used to knit scarves, gloves, socks. And that was the way we spent our evenings, knitting and doing things. Yeah.
Did they get sent off? Were they for the soldiers?
Yes. And in fact, I've got my dad's scarf in the cupboard that I didn't knit. So that must have been given to him from the supplies.
Do you remember, were there any stories? Because so many people died. There must have been people, you were lucky that obviously your dad came home, but did you know of people that had sort of tragedy in their families?
Yeah, my dad's friend who was sent over to North Africa, he either lost an arm or it was so severely damaged he could never use it again. But I had a friend, I didn't meet him until after I was married, and he was one of 4 boys, and 2 of his brothers were in the famous or infamous Changi jail in Singapore, where they were starving, and one of the brothers had an operation. The Japanese performed the operation without anaesthetic.
Ooh.
But those 2 brothers came home.
Wow.
And he had another one who was in the RAF, and he came home. And I think there was another one, but he was killed. But the friend that was my age, he was in the Merchant Navy, and he came home. But he would be a young starter. But sailors in the Merchant Navy were much younger than the Royal Navy. So yes, it was... I didn't really know anyone who was killed in the war.
That's lucky, really, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I don't think I did. Can't think of any offhand. But yeah, it was a long time, 5 years, wasn't it? Over 5 years.
Yeah, it is a long time.
Yes, yeah.
And so you lived in just outside Newcastle. So was there lots of bombing in the city and damage?
Yeah, loads, yes. Loads. Just, where we went to the museum, or we went into South Shields.
Yeah.
There was a marketplace there, and there was a bomb shelter underneath, and that was bombed. And everybody in there was killed.
Oh, no.
I don't know how much your children can take out of that.
Lots, I think. I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming to our assembly to talk to us, and handy that we can do it this way and that you don't have to travel all the way down from Newcastle to be able to do it. That's much better. And I'm sure that the children have found it fascinating to listen to all of the things that you can tell them about what it was like being in the war and why VE Day is going to be such a big celebration this week.
Yes. Yeah, well, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed doing it, and I hope the children enjoyed it too. Yes, great.
I'm sure they will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.